in the United Nations. But what happened to women in Israel who were mutilated, raped, molested, attacked, shocked, burned, and abducted is the real battle we are holding. Because we are here to defend the values of liberal societies, of LGBTQ, which Hamas fights endlessly, of women and children and free people who all they want is peace, and they are time again attacked and attacked and attacked. And unfortunately went to the biggest horror in history since World War II.
But if the goal is to make Israel safer and to make sure that the Jewish people are safer in the long run, is there no other way? Is displacing 2 million people and attacking refugee camps and hospitals the only way to go about this strategically?
But I don't know, where's the world? For decades we've been saying it. First the world told us, get out of Gaza. Get your settlements out of Gaza. We did that in 2005. We told the world and we told our people that it will be the new Hong Kong of the Middle East. We pulled out to the last iota. Then, within a year, they took it over with an Iranian-led platform and turned it into a military base with 10,000 missiles on our heads in the last 2 decades. What exactly are we supposed to do? Just sit idly by and be killed? That is the tragedy we've faced. And the world has many hypocritic leaders, especially in our region, who have financed this war machine, who's played it with the devil, who have danced with the devil, who have to look in the mirror and say to themselves, we have helped and develop an empire of monstrosity, of criminals, of terrorists who must be removed from our area.
I wish we had even more time today. There are so many other topics to discuss, so many facets to the current situation and this war against Hamas. Thank you, Mr. President, for taking the time. We appreciate it, and I hope we'll be able to speak again soon. Thank you. That does it for us today.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for joining us. Jose Diaz-Balart picks up our coverage right now.
It is 11. I'm Jose Diaz-Balart. Right now, Israel.
I wanted to just check a little bit, record a little bit of that, because the Bible says that a divided house will not stand. And we can see now that the Middle East is basically crumbling below their feet pertaining to the chaos.
We'll talk to an official from Doctors Without Borders who says hospitals there are at a, quote, breaking point. Back at home, sounding the alarm, why former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney says Donald Trump can never again be president. On Capitol Hill, Senator John Fetterman gets help from former Congressman George Santos. We'll explain why. And breaking overnight, a massive house explosion right outside Washington, D.C. What police were doing at the house just moments before the blast.
All right, let's go forward here. Boom.
In intense battles across Gaza, including in the center of Khan Yunis, Gaza's second largest city. This comes as the World Health Organization in Gaza says the situation is getting worse by the hour. Israel has been telling civilians around Gaza's second largest city to keep moving south. Civilians say there's simply nowhere for them to go, and that the area around the Rafah crossing on the border with Egypt is overwhelmed with people. The intensification of the conflict comes as Hamas continues to hold more than 130 hostages. The State Department joining calls now for an investigation into allegations Hamas uses rape and sexual violence as weapons of terror and how it may have led to the end of the recent pause.
One of the reasons they don't want to turn women over that they've been holding hostage, and the reason this pause fell apart, is they don't want those women to be able to talk about what happened to them during their time in custody.
Of all this suffering, there is some hopeful news. Premature babies evacuated from a Gaza hospital now in Egypt are getting stronger. NBC's Aaron McLaughlin has the story of one baby who appears to be making a remarkable recovery.
Dr. Sakine takes us to see baby Halema, known only by his mother's name.
What happened to his eye?
Remote explosion. All the building, all the neighbors died.
Doctors say this is what baby Halema looked like when he arrived, now growing stronger every day.
During sleeping, I dream by this boy.
You dream of this boy.
Yes.
What,
Actually,
what do you dream?
a dream that is happy. This boy is happy.
NBC's David Noriega is joining us this morning from Tel Aviv. David, thanks for being with us. What's the latest from the ground in Gaza?
Jose, that 1.9 million people, or more than 80% of the population of the Gaza Strip that the UN says has been displaced since the beginning of this war, many of them were pushed from the northern half of Gaza into the southern half in earlier phases of the war prior to the temporary truce agreement. Many of those people, in addition to the people already living in the south, including in Gaza's second largest city, Khan Yunis, are now being pushed further and further south, including the tens of thousands that we saw moving from Khan Yunis towards Rafah in just the last day. The UN says that tremendous population is now being concentrated into an area that is 1/3 the size of the Gaza Strip. In addition to this, there are all of the additional humanitarian factors that we're hearing about. Hospitals near collapse, people having no access to clean water or food or shelter, the increasing spread of disease from respiratory disease to gastrointestinal disease that we're hearing about from the Red Cross and the World Health Organization. The IDF, I should say, says that they are doing what they can to mitigate civilian casualties. They say that these evacuation orders are an example of that they've been dropping leaflets telling people to go to existing shelters, giving detailed evacuation plans for places they can go that are safe. Those shelters are overwhelmed, and what we hear from people in the Gaza Strip is that they feel there is nowhere safe for them to go. We're getting many testimonies from people of desperate conditions. I want to play you one clip of what one displaced person in Gaza had to say yesterday. Jose, take a listen.
They should kill us and relieve us so we won't be heartbroken by the people we lose. In our family, we have lost 56 people, and now we are stray and displaced to Khan Yunis. And they now say, from Khan Yunis, evacuate to Rafah.
Jose, again, the IDF says that it's targeting Hamas militants and infrastructure and that its military campaign is progressing. For civilians inside Gaza, one of their deepest fears, though, is that as a result of this war, they're going to be permanently displaced and relocated out of the Gaza Strip.
And that's a fear that generationally has been of concern for so many for so long. Now, David, as the fighting intensifies in Gaza, family members of hostages being held there just met with the Israeli war cabinet.
That's right. This meeting just took place this afternoon. We are working to confirm the reports that we're hearing, but it seems to have not gone particularly well. There was some tension and hostility between some of the families and some members of the war cabinet. What I can tell you, I'm in touch with a lot of families who still have loved ones inside of Gaza, and there is a very, very strong sense of fear, anxiety, and high tension, seeing the ferocity and intensity of the resumed fighting, particularly given the fact that these loved ones thought that during the ceasefire, they were going to be able to get reports of how their loved ones were doing, because part of the agreement was that the Red Cross would get access to those remaining hostages. That never happened. So these people are facing a complete black box. They have no idea whether the loved ones are alive or dead, what condition they're in, how they're faring in the context of this renewed fighting, and they are desperate for some kind of progress towards a new ceasefire agreement. Diplomatically, right now, the chances of such a new agreement are looking pretty dim, although what you hear from all parties, including the Qataris and the Americans and the Egyptians, as well as the Israelis, is that they are willing to renew negotiations. We're not actually seeing any sign that those negotiations are, in fact, progressing. Jose?
David Noriega in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, David. And with us to continue our conversation is Avril Benoit, Executive Director of Doctors Without Borders USA. Avril, thank you so much for being with us this morning. What are you learning from your teams on the ground in Gaza?
Well, the hospitals are overwhelmed. We have more than 300 staff there. Many of them are working in the south, in the hospitals where they were forced to relocate. We also have an international team of surgeons, anesthetists, intensive care specialists. And they say, for example, in one of the hospitals that we're supporting, Nasser Hospital, which normally would receive maybe 300 patients per day, and it's a busy hospital before all of this. Yesterday, 1,000 patients. So the hallways are filled with
More
injured
than
people.
100% more.
Unbelievable scale of suffering. And what they're seeing also is that with all the injuries coming through, you've got infections. So people who were injured some time ago, they didn't receive wound dressing changes, they didn't receive the antibiotics they needed. Now they've got necrotizing tissue, and that would require, in order to save their lives, amputations and so forth. These patients need long-term care, they need post-operative care, and so one of the things that we're calling for, in addition to the ceasefire, of course, to stop the siege, to allow more aid to come in, is to be able to medically evacuate the more serious patients to third-party places, third countries, in order for them to receive the care they need to stay alive.
Like the babies we saw in the beginning of the hour with Aaron McLaughlin, the babies that were able to be successfully sent from Gaza to Egypt, and they are recovering. But Avram, I'm just wondering, in a war situation, and your organization has been involved in helping people in all kinds of disasters, including man-made disasters, which is a war.
Yeah.
This is something that can be expected, unfortunately. How is it that we can best help those people in Gaza that are not participants in the war, but are victims of that war?
It is not at all expected, and it should never be tolerated, to have the kinds of attacks on civilians that we've seen in this particular war. We are seeing an unprecedented level of violence, indiscriminate violence that seems to be mostly affecting the civilians, and also hospitals, clinics, ambulances, civilian infrastructures. Even a World Health Organization medical depot, a warehouse, was told to evacuate in 24 hours. Completely unrealistic use of this evacuation notification mechanism, confusing to everybody, terrorizing for people who have already been displaced multiple times. So we shouldn't accept any of this.
I agree with you, but when, as the Israelis say, and they've been stating this, it would be a clear violation of the Geneva Conventions if, for example, fighters that are not dressed as military people, but rather civilians, actually take over or are part of hospitals, World Health Organization centers. It's very difficult for those places to not be considered a military target when, unfortunately, other people take them as such.
Yeah, I would disagree. I think when you've got a hospital full of patients, it's easily identifiable as a functioning hospital and should be protected under the Geneva Conventions.
No, it is. If hospitals are used for hospitals' sake only, they are, of course, to be protected. But the Israelis tell you that there are tunnels underneath, that Hamas is using the hospitals and the other places as shelters or even as command centers.
That's what they're saying, and we don't buy it. What we're seeing is hospitals are overflowing. The siege has meant that there's a lack of medication coming in. People don't have water. You have people dying and suffering from infections. You have a complete lack of maternity care. Any number of other things are going to kill people besides the bombs, which in and of themselves are terrorizing enough for a population that has no safe place to go. This is a total war. Since this end of the truce, we have seen a pummeling of entire neighborhoods. We have seen indiscriminate bombing, and so this targeting of the medical facilities and other civilian infrastructures has to stop. That's why we need a ceasefire.
And as a matter of fact, you signed an open letter to President Biden calling for an immediate and sustained ceasefire in Gaza, writing, quote, "It is impossible for us to operate at scale in Gaza. The level of humanitarian need is beyond the capacity of humanitarian actors to address because we, along with the entire civilian population, are intentionally blocked by Israel from accessing food, water, electricity, and the medical supplies we need to care for our patients." So I'm just wondering what responsibility Israel has in helping this, and what responsibility does Hamas have in helping this?
Well, Hamas is obviously an authority there. They have a responsibility as much as Israel to protect civilians. No civilians should be targeted in a conflict like this. And just to add to your question, the U.S. responsibility, as far as we're concerned, is that you have resources, military aid that is going to Israel for this. It's an ally, it's a partner, we get that. But there should be assurances that that aid is not going to be used to target civilians, to wipe out neighborhoods, and to attack hospitals. This aid should not be used to commit war crimes. And that is unfortunately what we're seeing, a lot of evidence that should be investigated, that on a systemic basis, war crimes are being committed, and we need to have those investigated, but certainly stop. We expect the U.S. government, which has said, oh, please protect civilians, be very careful about the civilians. We need real action as far as that goes.
And what would action look like?
Well, it would look like it's stopping. A ceasefire would be step one. And we understand all the arguments on the other side, but look at what we're facing here. The population of Gaza is displaced, under bombs, going to die of infections, dehydration. Children are affected. We have a mental health program now that started with children with nightmares, bedwetting, anxiety, nonstop. This is going to be long-term suffering, and that's one of the reasons that the humanitarian community is united in asking for a ceasefire now.
Avril Beno, thank you very much for coming in. I really appreciate your time.
Anytime.
Thanks. Up next, why former Republican Congressman George Santos, and of course that is something we'll be talking about in the future, but we want to talk about why Liz Cheney says it is critical Donald Trump not return to the White House.
What's going on right now in the Middle East is going beyond most people's comprehension, including of my own, because this is all escalating in Bible prophecy, that it talks about the war of all wars that will basically begin and end because of the Middle East. This is one of the reasons why we have spent so much time over in the Middle East, not just necessarily as religious activists in believing in the Lord Jesus Christ, not just in the fact that those people needed great help from the world in regards towards humanitarian as well as civilian population pertaining to trying to be conformed, but we have brought forth all kinds of material, Bibles, etc. The Gideons has spent a great deal of time over there
At the
in
Nova
trying
Festival, and watched as a woman was raped by multiple.
in trying to conform a group of people that basically has made up their minds that they're going to be unconformable. The answer, the proper answer, is the Holy Spirit making a plea of a revival that we have yet to truly see happen, not only over in the Middle East, but also here in America. And just like Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son, continues to say again and again and again, the only thing that's going to save those people over there towards the chaos, and the only thing that's going to save the planet in general, is going to be God. And God and God alone. Because we have reached a level right now of disturbances. And I knew this going back 25, 30 years ago, whenever I was watching the Jerry Springer show, whenever people was basically being entertained by other people's griefs and despairs. I knew that our country was going in the wrong direction then. And I think others did too, because I had never personally seen people laugh over other people's miseries. We was taught here in Northwest Tennessee that you don't do stuff like that. That's kind of like making fun of the retarded, or making fun of those who have been disfigured, either because of an accident or maybe they was born that way, as far as being invalids. We was always taught that you do not do stuff like that, because if you do, odds are it's going to come back on you, and the very thing that you was making fun of, that you thought was cute or cool, will actually be the very thing that God will allow to bring up into your life, and now you'll have to be with the same inflictions. The Bible does speak about that a divided house will not stand. And I have said all along, the reason why that this is occurring the way that it's occurring is because of various people over here in the Western world that decided that they was not going to accept the message coming from the founder of the Windmill Ministries missions that began after 9 tapes circulated to the White House in 1988 during Ronald Reagan's administration, because of the resistance movement that began right here in the Western world. It has now elevated to this. In addition to going back in the early 90s of what we seen with the Branch Davidians in 93, and then the Oklahoma bombing in 95, and I can go on and on and on about major events that's happened here in America that has led us down this endless road, including 9/11, to what we're facing off on today. If there has ever been a time that people needed to pray for the Middle East, if there's ever been a time that people needed to bond together as true moral citizens, regardless whether you're Christian or non-Christian, it is of today, because this thing is only unraveling more and more on a day-to-day level that I don't even think some of your professional war analysts, people like, well, there's dozens of them that's come forth that was good war strategists, but I don't think even our best war strategists over here in America could begin to believe of how this is just escalating on one front versus another. And instead of it getting better, it's getting worse. And I find it to be very, very discouraging and despairing of seeing people suffering this way, that as far as I'm concerned, all of it could have been avoided. All of it could have been avoided. So please listen to some more about this. I realize that it's depressing, but kicking the can down the road and thinking out of sight, out of mind is not the proper answer, especially if you are a concerned citizen, a patriot, and a Christian, towards being concerned about other people's well-being. Please listen.
Multiple Hamas militants before she was shot in the head.
And it seemed to me from watching the video, from what we've heard from people who were first responders, is that likely these women were raped and then killed.
Yes.
Mark, let's listen to what State Department spokesperson Matt Miller had to say about this yesterday.
We've obviously seen the reports that Hamas has committed sexual violence. They've committed rape. We have no reason at all to doubt those reports. When you look at all of the atrocities that Hamas carried out on October 7th and the atrocities that they have carried out since, the fact that they continue to hold women hostages, the fact that they continue to hold children hostages, the fact that it seems one of the reasons they don't want to turn women over that they've been holding hostage, and the reason this pause fell apart, is they don't want those women to be able to talk about what happened to them during their time in custody.
Mark, they don't have evidence of that, of the fact that they're holding women hostages because they don't want them to tell about these atrocities. But from your experience as an analyst and a CIA officer, it's very likely.
Well, Andrea, this is something that I think we talked about in the show several weeks ago, that when the hostages come out, there was likely to be some pretty brutal tales of what occurred. And now, of course, we're hearing the accounts what the Israelis presented at the UN yesterday. I think that makes some sense that Hamas would not want to release some of these hostages. After all, if you recall, when David Barnea, the head of Mossad, was in Doha, he and the Israeli delegation left because it was clear that Hamas did not want to release the women and children. But there's one point on this that I think is really important. These are barbaric tales, but I think this is going to resonate inside Israel. That has to do with two things in conflict and war that are important. That has to do with a sense of resolve and a will to fight. And the Israeli forces, 300,000 of whom are deployed now, certainly have a clear understanding of what they're up against. And so I think this is going to really steal and harden Israeli resolve. And, when there's talk in the international community of cessation of hostilities, that is not even, in the thinking of Israeli officials, or frankly, in American officials as well, because ultimately Hamas has to be degraded to the point where they can't carry out such an attack like this again.
And sexual violence like this is a war crime. So, Colin, what can be done to hold people accountable?
Well, you're absolutely right, Andrea. It is a war crime. Sexual and gender-based violence, we've seen this before by the Islamic State, Boko Haram, and other terrorist groups. There needs to be accountability. There needs to be a thorough investigation to establish that there is rule of law. These are among the most egregious acts that can occur in wartime, really at any time. And this is a deliberate action to, it's not only the physical act, it's the psychological impact as well, which is a big part of terrorism.
And Anna, the Secretary of Blinken has just announced a new policy. They'll have more details coming up in the briefing today. But this is a new policy to place visa restrictions on extremist settlers in the West Bank who, according to the State Department, are, quote, undermining peace, security, and stability there. So this will stop them from going back and forth from the West Bank, to the U.S.
Yeah, well, even in Israel, the settler issue is very divisive, and a lot of Israelis are really upset that settlers are stirring that pot, making it more difficult for them to tell their story from October 7th. So I think what the U.S. is trying to do is to tamp down on this very extreme group of Israelis that are making it difficult for the rest of Israeli society.
Anna Schechter, you've done so much reporting on this, on the whole war, so thank you very much. It's been weeks and weeks of really hard work, and Colin Clark and Mark Polymeropoulos, thanks to both of you. And infiltration, a former U.S. ambassador arrested and accused of being a secret agent for Cuba. What the security break means, that's coming next. You're watching Andrea Mitchell Reports. This is MSNBC.
Liberty Mutual Custom.
You see, it ain't getting bad. It's already bad, and it's getting worse. And it's infectious.
Innovations for the future.
Business trends of the present.
Distinctive traditions from the past.
Meet the power players in Asia's emerging and
contaminated.
established markets.
Who will stand out from the competition?
What will attract new industry consumers?
Where will productivity hit a new level?
And how will it impact
And
the
it's
global
growing
economy?
like a cancer.
Join me.
And if we don't nip it in the bud before it gets too far out of hand,
can help you preserve your wealth.
It's only going to continue to get even worse and worse and worse and worse.
Like 80 cartridges.
And
welcome to Chillville.
It was part of the part of the concerns back during
Down, gold up.
Back during young Bush's era.
Portugal, with some help from
That the Republicans cheated their way towards beating the Democrats pertaining to the hanging chads of basically the elderly people
for many years.
that was not convinced that global warming was real. But it's the very thing that concerned that particular administration at that time in regards towards mushroom cloud bombs.
Jimmy Carter. Golly, I never thought I'd say that, right? Kane even perked up when I said that. I know, right? But
Whenever we start seeing mushroom cloud bombs pertaining to radiation poisoning, pertaining to nuclear, you can basically say that Armageddon is upon us. And you can basically say that at that period of time, that the very predictions that God talked about pertaining to throwing the world off in a great tribulation is now in effect. It hasn't happened yet, but it is very, very close. Besides that, the Bible is very clear towards stating the fact that whenever God returns to gather up his elect from the four corners of the earth, he's going to return not as a lamb, but as a lion, and he's going to return in flaming fire, taking vengeance upon them who know not him, and upon them that know not God, and obey not the Gospels. As he's gathering up the elect from the four corners of the earth, he will also be throwing this planet off in the Great Tribulation. That means everything that is burnable will be burnt. Everything that can be burnt will be burnt. It says, woe be unto the inhabitants hereupon to the earth, and to burn not the greenery and the oil, to preserve those factors at that particular time until the rest of the seals gets opened. I have tried and tried and tried to tell people that the Bible Belt area that wanted to say that the first seal, the white horseman, was of the Antichrist sense, that was an absolute 100% lie. And because of the resistance movement that come from the corporate churches and the political parties in 1988, coming through and by Homeland Security, Secret Service, they have put us in the positions that we're in right now. And the sad thing about it is a great deal of those people are still in power. A great deal of people are still influential towards having their positions, regardless whether it be with government related jobs or media pertaining to still promoting their poisons out there to the world. And it is really, really sad, because we have reached a level right now of distress that before I go to sleep and wake up in the morning, total chaos could be right here at my own doorstep in regards towards military affairs. So don't think that these events that's happening across the pond is not going to affect you. Because if they don't affect you one way, they will affect you in another, towards prices and supply chain disruptions and everything else. So don't think that just because this is happening, let's say 6,000 miles across the pond, that it's not going to be affecting you directly or indirectly, because it will. Coming near a neighborhood near you. That is basically the Windmill Ministries trajectory that I've been putting out warnings again and again and again now for 30 plus years to prepare, to get ready. Being the watchman on the wall, seeing these things materializing.
He's like the annoying guy. I saw videos of him when he was younger, talking about like throwing his medals off a bridge or something. He is that like annoying, super annoying leftist dude who is actually everything that he claims to hate, but loves he's a scenester. He loves the branding that comes with pretending otherwise. He's one of those annoying guys.
Sounds to me like a charlatan. A liar.
In 1964, they tried to pass Medicare in 1964, and the Republicans shot it down. It wasn't until 66.
It's chaotic. It is absolutely chaotic.
Plan out who pumps.
But his extreme rhetoric on the campaign trail is a major concern, describing political rivals as vermin. President Biden calls that Nazi talk.
Just watch as the situation gets worse day after day and express sympathy and condolences, but take no actions. So there's a tremendous sense of delusionment, disappointment, in addition to the suffering. And that's just among the people who are stuck in Rafah, waiting for the next phase of this war, which, as you mentioned, could be even more destructive, even more deadly, because this campaign began almost 2 months ago in northern Gaza, and Israeli troops are still fighting in northern Gaza. In fact, some of the most intense ground fighting, where troops are now actually out of their tanks, going into some of the most densely populated alleyways and apartment blocks, is happening in the north. And now the new phase of the operation is beginning in the south. So the Israelis are going in heavy, like they went in heavy in the north, in the south around Khan Yunis, with airstrikes, with tanks, not yet on the ground, street-to-street fighting, although that is expected to follow as it followed in the north. And as the fighting is continuing in Khan Yunis, this heavy initial assault, people are moving south, and the last place they can go, the end of the road, is the city of Rafah, right on the Egyptian border. And that is the city I was just describing, where people are waiting for what's coming next. They feel that they've been crammed down in this corner of the Gaza Strip, and they don't know if the Israelis will continue the offensive into Rafah. They assume that it will, because that has generally been the pattern. And I think that is one of the scenarios that the UN is warning about. What happens when the Israeli offensive reaches all the way down to the bottom of Gaza? What will happen to all the people who are now gathered there?
NBC's Richard Engel, thank you for that. Let me bring in Michael Crowley, diplomatic correspondent for the New York Times, and Peter Baker, the Times chief White House correspondent and MSNBC political analyst. Peter, it occurs to me as I'm hearing Richard Engel quote someone saying, how can the world watch this and do nothing? The two things that President Biden may be best known for, his empathy and his long experience in foreign affairs and support of Israel, can almost seem to be at conflict right now. What's the administration's biggest concern about the Israeli operations as we see them on the ground and moving forward?
Well, the Biden administration has made a point of telling the Israelis that if they go into the south, as they've now done, they needed to show how they can do it in a way that would minimize civilian casualties. And they have taken credit, to some extent, for some of the things that Israel has done, including providing a map of where safe zones may be during the conflict and so forth. But all of that, in the end, of course, doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a very intense conflict, very intense battling in the part of the country, the part of Gaza, that had been, Gazans have been told was the place to go. They had been told to leave the north because that's where the fighting would be, to go to the south. Now they're in the south, and the fighting has followed them there. For the Biden administration, obviously, which doesn't want to do anything to undermine Israel, it is still a very big challenge, because they obviously also don't want, to maximize civilian casualties. So they're trying to manage this in a very delicate way, but probably getting it a little bit from both sides.
Michael, do we know if there's any movement at all trying to resurrect some form of a ceasefire?
Well, look, I was just actually in Israel and then Dubai with Secretary Blinken last week, and what U.S. officials will say about that is that they are very determined to get hostages who are still held by Hamas released, and that does include Americans. And so I think that there are ongoing conversations to see whether there's some way there can be another break in the fighting. The U.S. also says that continuing humanitarian aid into Gaza is an urgent priority, but there's this very tricky balancing act where the Israeli military wants to conduct its offensive, wants to get Hamas leaders as quickly as possible, wants to get this over with. But the U.S., as Peter noted, is trying to see if there's some way to make this a little more humane also by trying to get these prisoners out, trying to get aid in. I mean, that does necessitate another break in the fighting. So I would not be at all surprised to see that happen again. But at the moment, I don't think we're on the brink of it.
So, Peter, your paper quotes a couple of experts in the laws of war who say they have not seen significant changes in recent days in how Israel is waging its war, that warnings to civilians, and you touched on this, appear to be ineffective. But Matt Miller said yesterday it's too soon to really judge whether Israel has been doing enough to protect civilians in Gaza. Are the private messages that President Biden and the White House is sending to Israel different from what we're hearing publicly?
Well, I think they're a little blunter. They're a little more candid, obviously. They are calibrating what they say in public. But even in public, you're hearing kind of a little bit of a mixed message. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, even Secretary Blinken, who Michael has been following around, have been pretty strong in the last few days about talking about Israel's obligation to avoid civilian casualties. Pretty tough in making that point. You haven't heard the president say that. And even Jake Sullivan, the president's personal national security advisor, came out yesterday to the briefing room, was more cautious, I think, in his tone and his language, in reminding everybody that Hamas is the one that started this, that Hamas is the one that has been using, civilians in effect as shields, and that they have that Israel is in fact, has a right to defend itself, even as, of course, it should follow the laws of war. And so I think that you're seeing a mixed tonal message in effect from the administration, maybe good cop, bad cop. And behind the scenes, I think you're hearing them say it pretty bluntly, that they are trying to tell Israel that, yes, they should, do what they need to do to destroy Hamas. But as Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, said the other day, there's a risk of delegitimizing its international credibility and further radicalizing another generation of Palestinians, depending on how they do it. And that's a message that's hard for Israel to take. They want and need the United States to be on their side. They don't want to have a break with the United States, but at the same time, they view it differently than they do in Washington.
So to that point, Michael, I mean, just a short time ago, Israel's president was on with our Ana Cabrera, and she asked him specifically about the growing international concern, the outrage as people see more and more what the impact is on civilians. Let me play what he had to say about that.
First, the world told us, get out of Gaza. Get your settlements out of Gaza. We did that. Within a year, they took it over with an Iranian-led platform and turned it into a military base with 10,000 missiles on our heads in the last 2 decades. What exactly are we supposed to do? Just sit idly by and be killed? It's very easy to judge Israel, and it happened in your neighborhood or in your city. You may think otherwise.
Is it clear from your time there, from your conversations with folks, Michael, whether Israel is concerned about how international opinion has turned against their tactics? I mean, by the IDF's own assessment, for every Hamas fighter they've gotten, they've killed 2 civilians.
Well, Chris, opinions in Israel are not uniform even within the government, but I think there is a strong sentiment that amounts to the idea that the world is basically against Israel. The world is always going to find a reason to criticize Israel, and Israel basically has to do what it has to do to defend itself. But the relationship with the United States stands on its own and is another matter. So I think that Israel can withstand a lot of world condemnation. It expects it, it can tolerate it, and it thinks as long as the U.S. has its back, it can survive it. That's why I know Israeli leaders are very closely watching the nuances in the Biden administration that Peter just described, and also American public opinion, which drives, obviously, American policy. I think for now, Peter put his finger on it. You're not hearing President Biden really break in a significant way with Israel. There is increasing pressure coming from the likes of Blinken and Austin and others. The messaging has gotten a little more sharp. But look, what we have not heard is anything suggesting real consequences. Blinken and others laid out all these demands isn't quite the right word, but strong advice or pleas for Israel to do a lot more to protect civilians, lower the casualties, get the humanitarian aid in, get the hostages out. But what is the next step if Israel doesn't do those things or doesn't seem to be taking America's advice? No one has laid that out. There's no stick on the table. Strings on American aid, reduction on American aid. Now, it may be in the works. I'm sure it's something the White House is talking about, but it's not out there right now. And so for now, I think Israel feels like they can survive this international condemnation.
And before we go, Michael, I want to ask you about the word we just got from the State Department that they're going to be imposing a visa ban on Israeli settlers who were believed to be involved in the attacks on the Palestinians in the West Bank. Put that into context for us.
Well, in recent years, you have had a real dramatic surge in violence by right-wing Israeli settlers. They're often heavily armed. They're attacking Palestinians in the West Bank with the goal basically of driving them off of their land. And these settlers essentially don't, most or many or all of them don't believe there should be a Palestinian state. They want that land for Israel. And they are attacking and intimidating these Palestinians. The U.S. has condemned this violence repeatedly. I think there's frustration and a sense that particularly this very conservative Netanyahu government in Israel is allowing this to happen with impunity. So the Biden administration is taking the next step here and will be denying visas to dozens of these people, preventing them from entering the United States. Incidentally, this action does include Palestinians who are believed to have committed acts of violence against Israelis. But I think the thrust of it here is against these settlers who the Biden administration basically feels are out of control, and the Netanyahu government is not doing anything about it. And that's making it a lot harder to move things forward, to get some stability in the West Bank, someday in Gaza, and someday maybe have a two-state solution, which is the big picture goal here for the Biden administration right now.
Michael Crowley, Peter Baker, gentlemen, thank you so much. Meantime, funding for Israel and Ukraine continues to divide Congress. And today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is making a personal plea to U.S. senators, trying to convince them to greenlight $60 billion in aid for his country. He doesn't have much time to do it. NBC's Sahil Kapoor is following that story from Capitol Hill. How urgent is the need, and what are you hearing about the chances Zelensky can change some minds on this issue and get it moving?
Well, it's widely seen as urgent, Chris, but Zelensky has got a very tough challenge ahead of him, and that's largely because some of the Republicans who are supportive of additional aid to Ukraine have bought into the idea that it must be linked to a major immigration policy piece, specifically restrictions on asylum and parole, and those negotiations in the Senate have gone badly. Even Mitt Romney and Mitch McConnell, two Republicans who are in favor of aid to Ukraine, say there won't be any without an immigration agreement. And as far as the negotiations on the asylum piece, according to my sources, there has been progress there. Democrats have been willing to put policy changes on the table, including raising the so-called credible fear standard against the wishes of some immigration advocates. There's not been as much progress on the issue of parole. Republicans want sharp limits to presidential powers in granting humanitarian parole. And there's also a kind of a dispute about the parameters of the negotiation. Republicans say this is not a give and take on immigration. They say their give is Ukraine aid, and immigration is all take for them. Let's put up what Senator John Cornyn, the Texas Republican, told me. He said, quote, "There's a misunderstanding on the part of Senator Schumer and some of our Democratic friends. This is not a traditional negotiation where we come up with a bipartisan compromise on the border. This is a price that has to be paid in order to get the supplemental," unquote. A lot of Democrats have cited that to argue that Republicans see this as a hostage negotiation, not a policy discussion. Nevertheless, there is likely to be a vote tomorrow in the Senate to try to move forward with this $106 billion aid package requested by President Biden. That includes assistance to Ukraine, to Israel, to Taiwan, as well as funding for the U.S.-Mexico border. But it needs 60 votes to move forward, and Republicans have made clear they will filibuster it. Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, made a plea as he filed for this motion. Let's play what he had to say.
In the coming days, I urge my colleagues to do the right thing and support moving forward on the supplemental package. We can't ever put a price on defending democracy in its hour of need, because if Ukraine falls, Putin will keep on going. Autocrats around the world will be emboldened. Democracy, this grand and noble experiment, will enter an era of decline.
And just today as well.
I'm going to leave it right there. You can't get no more serious than that. If you live not only in America, but if you live in any open democracy that is not ruled by dictators and oligarchs. If there has ever been a startled warning of the affairs that now we can see coming down the pike, it's today. And as I've said before, all this could have been prevented if the Reagans, if the White House, and if the corporate churches would have stood together. But because they didn't stand together, Now we have a divided house. And according to Jesus' teachings, a divided house will not stand. And I'm just afraid that we ain't seen nothing yet in comparison to what's coming down the pike. Just like what, let's back it up. Let's be sure we get it. One more time so that you won't forget it. The senator, listen to him.
Because if Ukraine falls, Putin will keep on going. Autocrats around the world will be emboldened. Democracy, this grand and noble experiment, will enter an era of decline.
Father God, we pray, Lord Jesus, for not only our American government, but we pray for all the governments who truly cling to democracy towards being an open republic. I want to pray, Lord, a special prayer for the people over in Jerusalem and over in the Middle East, the Holy Land, on both sides, that are going through this endless pain and suffering that all could have been diverted, all could have been avoided if things would have been properly handled, beginning in Northwest Tennessee. I pray, God, for the people in Northwest Tennessee, that they will come out of their stupor towards this bewitching effect that has happened before it is too late. I pray, God, for a healing of our great nation. I pray, God, that the people will be liberated over in the Middle East pertaining to Jerusalem and Israel, that though right now it may give the appearances of what they're doing is harmfully wrong, which, looking at it from a practical standpoint, it is, but at the same time, one must realize that they have been dealing with this problem now for thousands of years. And if they don't nip it in the bud, it's only going to come back and haunt the people again and again and again. I know, God, that war has never been a glorious thing. Disputes, conflicts, even horrible disagreements has never been a pleasant thing. But I just pray, God, that you will come quickly pertaining to the Lord, and that you will resurrect your people from these horrors that they're now having to either watch, listen to, or even experience on a day-to-day level. And I know by looking at the war over in Israel that's now been in effect now for almost 2 months, as well as the war going on over in other parts of the world, including the Ukrainians, that your teachings through John the Revelator regarding revelations of the first 4 chapters of you stating that Satan would throw some of us off into prison, and to be thou faithful unto death, and he who shall overcometh will not be hurt of the second death. I know now that those teachings are more in the right perspective in the 21st century of what we're witnessing and what we're seeing escalating all over the world, including here in America, pertaining to our streets being unsafe, our communities being torn apart. I know, Father God, that in your divine teachings that you tried to give out warnings and advisories that most people didn't take heed to, regarding that Satan will come down in great wrath in the last days, because he or it knoweth his days are short. I just pray, O merciful God, that you will have mercy upon the elderly, the sick, the depleted, the children, the defenseless, and that you, O Lord, that even your teaching said to pray that our flights shall not be either in the wintertime, or to pray that you are not suppling with supping children of either those who are innocent and defenseless, or those who are pregnant regarding these affairs. Like I said, the first 4 chapters of Revelations in the King James Version Bible has become very obvious of what you was talking about pertaining to giving out warnings to the 7 churches upon to the planet, that today is more evident than what it has ever been. We want to thank you, O Lord, for what you've done, what you're doing, and for what you're going to do. Thank you, God, for being merciful unto us to be able to have a resolution to all this. Now, whether or not humanity turns to that or not will be up to humanity, and I feel like that once they've gone through enough suffering that they will turn to thee, because I have always said, God, that there will be a remnant that will rise out of the ashes pertaining to all this. I just don't know when and where and how all this is going to resonate pertaining to seeing the meek inheriting the earth. I just pray, O merciful God, that you will lead us not into temptation, and that you will deliver us from this evil that has basically impenetrated into our lives and into our family lives, into our communities, into our countries, and that there will be a great anointing revival that will elevate into a revolution before it is too late. Pray, God, for my personal family. Pray, God, for my granddaughter. Pray, Lord, once more for my friends and family. Pray, God, that you be merciful unto all of us, and that you will be glorified in all. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to also pray for our military, our United States military, especially those with such patriotic hearts in our volunteer military as of right now. We want to keep those families, especially during the holiday season, in our closest prayers, because families that get torn apart by these type of events and they have to go serve in other parts of the world is a very incredible hard thing, not just for the soldier, male or female, but also for the families. So let's keep them in our prayers in these perilous times that has befallen upon to society, just as the Bible predicts would occur in the last days, in the final remaining last days. Thank you. God bless you. Good luck to all of us. May heaven help all of us. Just want to say, God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless those who are truly striving towards a righteous, eternal, better way. And God bless Israel and Jerusalem in praying for God's original chosen people. Shalom.